Colorado Territory, 1873. The howling wind that had sent tumbleweeds scattering across the dusty main street of Pine Creek fell silent, as if the very elements knew to stand aside for Hannah Wells. She paused at the edge of town, her pale blue dress hanging loose on her thin frame, her long blonde hair tied back in a practical knot at the nape of her neck. At 23 years old, her face still carried the soft beauty of youth, but her eyes told a different story, one of grief etched deep, aging her beyond her years. Behind her trailed 3 children. Emma, 8 years old with her mother's golden hair. Thomas, 6, quiet and watchful like his father had been, and little Sarah, just 4, clutching a worn rag doll to her chest. Hannah's worn leather boots kicked up small clouds of dust as she approached the general store, her shoulders squared with a determination that belied her exhaustion. "You can't build a life from ashes," she whispered to herself, the mantra that had carried her through 6 months of widowhood after influenza had claimed her husband. The frontier breaks everyone eventually. Best to keep your heart locked tight and just survive. That belief, that the West was no place for softness, for vulnerability, had been reinforced with every mile of their journey from St. Louis. She had left behind the sympathetic glances of neighbors who saw only a pitiful young widow, unable to manage without a husband. Hannah had her pride, if little else. She also had her children and the deed to her late husband's uncle's abandoned homestead somewhere near Pine Creek. What she wanted was simple: to claim that land, build a modest living, and raise her children away from pitying stares. What she needed, though she would never admit it, was to believe that safety and love could exist in the same breath again. The storekeeper, an older man with spectacles perched on his nose, eyed her skeptically as she unfolded the worn letter containing directions to the homestead. "That's Holloway land," he said, frowning. 10 miles north. Nobody's worked it since old Jim passed 3 years back. Probably nothing left but a shell and overgrowth now. Hannah's heart sank, but her face remained impassive. "We'll manage. With all due respect, ma'am, that's no place for a woman alone with young ones. Wolves been spotted near there, not to mention the occasional drifter using abandoned places." "I said we'll manage," Hannah repeated, her voice firmer. "I need supplies, not opinions." As she was paying for flour, salt, and ammunition she barely knew how to use, the store's door swung open. The sudden shaft of sunlight silhouetted a tall figure, momentarily blinding her. When her vision cleared, she found herself looking up at a young man, perhaps 25, his hat clutched respectfully in his hands. His light brown hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar, and a day's worth of stubble shadowed his strong jawline. Despite the trail dust on his clothes, there was something undeniably vital about him, a sense of contained energy, of capability. "Pardon, ma'am," he said, his voice carrying the slight drawl of Texas. "Couldn't help overhearing. You'd be the new owner of the Holloway place." Hannah stiffened. "And if I am?" He extended a hand. "Ryan Gentry. I've been working neighboring lands." "Your uncle, or was it your husband's uncle, hired me occasionally before he passed?" "My husband's uncle," Hannah corrected, reluctantly taking his hand. His grip was firm but gentle, his palm calloused from work. Ryan nodded, seeming to understand more than she'd said. His gaze flickered to the children, who had gathered closer to their mother in the presence of this stranger. "Place needs work," he said simply. "Roof's got a hole where a branch came down last winter. North pasture fence is down in places. Well's good though, and the foundation's solid." Before Hannah could respond, little Sarah tugged at her skirt. "Mama, I'm hungry." Ryan smiled at the child, then looked back at Hannah. "Ma'am, I'd be happy to drive you folks out there. Got my wagon outside. Seems like a fair trade. You buy me dinner at the hotel first, I'll tell you everything I know about that homestead. Might save you weeks of figuring things out yourself." Something in his direct, honest gaze made Hannah hesitate. For months, she'd refused all offers of help, determined to stand alone. But here, facing the reality of an unknown homestead with 3 hungry children and night approaching, practicality warred with pride. "One meal," she conceded, "and only because my children are tired." That evening at the hotel's small dining room, Hannah watched in astonishment as Ryan engaged her normally shy children in easy conversation, asking Emma about her doll, discussing horses with Thomas, and somehow coaxing the first genuine smile she'd seen in months from Sarah. The thing about the West, Ryan said quietly while the children were distracted by the promise of apple pie, is that nobody survives it alone. Not really. Hannah stiffened. I don't need rescuing, Mr. Gentry. Never suggested you did, Mrs. Wells. But even the strongest need neighbors. That's not weakness. It's just the way of things out here. Something about his words, not condescending, simply stating a truth, penetrated the armor she'd so carefully constructed. The next morning, true to his word, Ryan loaded their meager belongings onto his wagon and drove them to the homestead. The property came into view as they crested a gentle hill. A small house nestled against a backdrop of pines, a creek burbling nearby, meadows stretching out on one side. It was both better and worse than Hannah had imagined. The potential was there, but so was the evidence of 3 years' neglect. As Ryan helped unload their trunks, Thomas pointed excitedly to the dilapidated barn. Look, Mama. Chickens. Indeed, a small flock of chickens, gone wild but still present, scratched in the dirt near the barn. Hannah felt the first flutter of hope. Perhaps they could make this work after all. Ryan set the last trunk down. I should get going. Thank you, Hannah said stiffly, already calculating how many days of work lay ahead. He hesitated, hat in hand. Mrs. Wells, I don't mean to presume, but that roof won't fix itself. I could come back tomorrow, help you get settled properly. Hannah was about to refuse when Emma spoke up. Please, Mama. Mr. Gentry knows where everything is. Looking at her daughter's hopeful face, Hannah relented. Just for the roof. But one day became 2, then a week. Ryan appeared each morning, worked alongside Hannah all day, and left each evening to return to his small cabin on neighboring land. He fixed the roof, repaired fences, showed Hannah how to coax the kitchen garden back to life, and taught Thomas how to feed the chickens that gradually became tame again. Hannah found herself looking forward to his arrival each day, then immediately chastising herself for the feeling. The frontier has no room for such foolishness. She reminded herself as she watched him patiently showing Emma how to gather eggs without frightening the hens. Men leave or die out here. Better to depend only on yourself. Yet as spring bloomed into summer, Hannah's rigid boundaries began to soften. She discovered Ryan was no drifter, but had saved enough from years of ranch work to purchase his own small spread nearby. He was educated too, occasionally reading to the children in the evenings from a volume of poetry he kept in his saddlebag. One evening, after the children were asleep, Hannah joined Ryan on the porch where he was repairing a lantern. Why are you helping us? She finally asked, the question that had been burning in her for weeks. Ryan set down his tools, considering her question seriously. My ma died when I was 9. Pa did his best, but we struggled until neighbors stepped in. Not with charity, with community. That's the real currency out here. He paused. And truth be told, this place has felt empty since old Jim passed. It's good hearing children's laughter here again. Something in his honest answer bypassed Hannah's carefully constructed defenses. For the first time in over a year, she found herself talking about her husband, about the illness that swept through their neighborhood, about her fear of failing her children. The hardest part, she confessed, is knowing they need more than just survival. They need joy, security. How do I give them that when I'm barely keeping us fed? You already are, Ryan said quietly. They're happy, Hannah. You've given them a home. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something shifted between them in that moment. A recognition of friendship that had grown into something neither was ready to name. The next day, disaster struck. Hannah was hanging laundry when she heard screams from the creek. She ran toward the sound to find Sarah had fallen in where the bank had eroded. The usually gentle water was swollen from recent rains, carrying her daughter downstream as Emma and Thomas shouted helplessly from the shore. Hannah plunged in without thinking, fighting the current towards Sarah's flailing form. The water was shockingly cold, dragging at her skirts as she struggled forward. Just as her fingers brushed Sarah's dress, her foot slipped on a rock, plunging her under. Strong arms suddenly grabbed both her and Sarah, hauling them toward the bank. Ryan had arrived for his daily visit just in time, diving in without hesitation. They collapsed on the shoreline, all three coughing up water. I thought, Hannah gasped, clutching Sarah to her chest. I thought I was going to lose her. But you didn't, Ryan said, pushing wet hair from his face. You didn't hesitate, Hannah. You jumped right in. That evening, after the children were finally asleep, the The delayed shock hit Hannah like a physical blow. She sank onto the porch steps, shaking uncontrollably. Ryan, who had stayed to ensure everyone was truly well, sat beside her and simply wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "It's all right," he murmured. "They're safe. You're safe." For the first time since her husband's death, Hannah allowed herself to lean on someone else's strength. She turned her face into Ryan's shoulder and wept. For the fear of that afternoon, for the months of struggling alone, for the husband she'd lost, and the uncertain future ahead. When the storm of emotion passed, she pulled away, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. You must think me terribly weak." "Weak?" Ryan looked genuinely surprised. "Hannah Wells, you may be the strongest person I've ever met. Strength isn't about never bending. It's about how you carry on despite everything." Something changed between them after that day. Ryan still came to help, but now he sometimes stayed for supper, teaching the children card games afterward or helping with bedtime stories. Hannah found herself watching his hands as he worked, noticing the gentle way he answered Thomas's endless questions, appreciating the sound of his laugh. By midsummer, the homestead had transformed. The garden flourished, chickens provided eggs daily, and Ryan had helped Hannah acquire 2 milk cows and a horse. The house, once abandoned, now gleamed with fresh whitewash. Hannah's determination combined with Ryan's knowledge had created something neither could have managed alone. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies rise from the meadow, Ryan turned to her with uncharacteristic seriousness. "Hannah, there's something I need to tell you." Her heart stuttered. This was it. He was moving on, his good deed done. She braced herself. "I've had a letter," he continued, "from my brother in Kansas City. He's offered me a partnership in his business there. It would mean a steady income, security." "I see," Hannah said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "When will you leave?" Ryan studied her face. "I haven't decided that I will." He paused. "This land gets in your blood. These mountains, this sky, the people." Hope and fear warred within her. "The children would miss you terribly," she managed. "Only the children?" His voice was gentle. Hannah looked away. "It would be difficult without your help." "Hannah." He waited until she met his eyes. "I'm not offering to stay as your farmhand." The implications hung in the air between them. "I can't," she whispered. "Ryan, I can't risk it. Everyone I've loved dies, leaves." He shook his head. "That's the lie the frontier tells you, Hannah. That love is a luxury you can't afford out here. But it's exactly the opposite. It's the only thing that makes any of this worthwhile." Before she could respond, hoofbeats approached in the gathering dusk. 3 riders appeared, stopping at the edge of the yard. Hannah recognized the leader as Porter Walsh, a rancher who had been pressuring smaller homesteaders to sell out to his growing operation. "Evening, Mrs. Wells," Walsh called, remaining mounted. "Just passing by to see if you've reconsidered my offer for this place." Hannah stood. "As I told you last month, Mr. Walsh, this land isn't for sale." Walsh's pleasant expression hardened. "Ma'am, with respect, you're sitting on a valuable water source for this valley. My cattle need access to that creek. It's not fitting for a woman alone to block progress in these parts." Ryan rose slowly beside her. "She's not alone, Walsh." The rancher's eyes narrowed. "This isn't your affair, Gentry. Unless." His gaze flicked between them, and his mouth curled into an unpleasant smile. "Well now, that explains a few things." "Mr. Walsh," Hannah said firmly, "my answer remains no. This is my children's inheritance. Might want to reconsider, Mrs. Wells." Walsh's voice dropped. "Frontier's dangerous. Accidents happen. Barns catch fire. Children wander off." Ryan stepped forward, his body tense. "That sounded remarkably like a threat, Walsh. I suggest you ride on before it becomes something you'll regret." The standoff stretched for several heartbeats before Walsh shrugged elaborately. "No threat intended. Just neighborly concern. Good evening to you both." As the riders departed, Ryan turned to Hannah. "Pack some things for you and the children. You'll stay at my place tonight." "I will not be frightened off my land," Hannah protested. "This isn't about fear. It's about sense. We don't know what Walsh might try. My cabin's defensible, and we can keep watch on your property from there." Recognizing the wisdom in his words, Hannah agreed. Within the hour, they had transferred sleepy children and essential belongings to Ryan's small but well-built cabin a half-mile away. From its position on a slight rise, they could see Hannah's homestead clearly in the moonlight. Near midnight, their vigilance was rewarded. Torchlight moved across Hannah's property, heading toward the barn. "Stay with the children," Ryan said, checking his rifle. "No." Hannah grabbed her husband's old shotgun. "This is my fight too." Together they raced through the darkness. As they approached, they saw 3 men attempting to set fire to the barn where the livestock were kept. The sound of confused, frightened animals carried through the night air. "That's far enough," Ryan called out, his rifle raised. The men spun, one dropping a torch which sputtered out on the damp ground. In the ensuing chaos, shots were fired. Hannah felt a bullet whistle past her ear as she and Ryan took cover behind the well. They returned fire, careful to aim away from the barn and animals. When silence fell, the would-be arsonists had fled, leaving only hoof prints and a dropped hat that Hannah recognized as belonging to one of Walsh's ranch hands. The animals were unharmed, though badly frightened. "We need to report this to the sheriff," Ryan said, checking Hannah for injuries with gentle hands. "It won't matter," Hannah replied bitterly. "Men like Walsh own the law around here. Then we'll need another approach." Ryan's expression was resolute. "But first, we need to ensure you and the children are safe." For the next week, Hannah and the children remained at Ryan's cabin while he rode to neighboring homesteads, quietly gathering support. Word of Walsh's attempted intimidation spread, and soon a rotation of neighbors kept watch over Hannah's property day and night. The crisis had forced everything into sharp relief. Hannah could no longer deny the truth that had been growing within her heart, that Ryan had become essential to her happiness, not just her survival. His steadfastness, his gentle strength, his easy way with her children, all had breached the walls she'd built around her heart. Yet just as this realization dawned, a new complication arose. A letter arrived from Ryan's brother, demanding an immediate answer about the business opportunity. The envelope also contained a train ticket to Kansas City, dated for the following week. Hannah found Ryan staring at the ticket, his expression unreadable. "You should go," she said softly, though the words felt like stones in her mouth. "It's the sensible choice." Ryan looked up, his eyes searching hers. "Is that what you want me to do? Leave. What I want doesn't matter. This is about your future." "Hannah." He set the ticket aside. "You and the children are my future. If you'll have me." Hope flared, but fear quickly doused it. "You can't mean that. You've known us only a season. And in that season, I found everything I never knew I was looking for." He took her hands in his. "I love you, Hannah Wells. I love your strength, your determination. I love the mother you are to those children. I even love your stubbornness." Tears filled her eyes. "Ryan, I'm still broken. I don't know if I can be what you deserve. I'm not asking you to be anything but exactly who you are." He smiled. "Besides, who said I deserve anything special? I'm just a man who found his home the day he found you." Before Hannah could respond, hoofbeats once again approached. This time, it was Sheriff Mills, accompanied by 2 deputies and, surprisingly, Walsh himself. "Mrs. Wells," the sheriff called, dismounting. "Got a complaint here from Mr. Walsh about gunfire and threats against his men." Hannah straightened her spine. "Interesting, given that his men were attempting to burn down my barn last week." Walsh sneered. "Lies from a desperate woman trying to justify squatting on land she can't possibly manage." Ryan stepped forward. "We have witnesses, Sheriff. 7 neighbors who've been keeping watch since the attempt. And this," he produced the hat they'd recovered, "belongs to Tom Fredericks, who works Walsh's North Range." The sheriff frowned, examining the hat. "That true, Walsh?" Walsh's confident expression faltered. "My men wouldn't, Sheriff." A rider galloped up, interrupting. It was young Sam Peterson from a neighboring farm. "Just caught 2 men trying to poison the Wells Creek upstream. Got one tied up, Fredericks, Walsh's man." In the confrontation that followed, Walsh's scheme unraveled completely. The captive ranch hand confessed, hoping for leniency, revealing Walsh's plan to drive out smaller landowners through intimidation and sabotage to consolidate water rights in the valley. As the sheriff escorted a furious Walsh away to face charges, Hannah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Yet another, more personal conflict still remained unresolved. That evening, after the excitement had died down and the children were asleep in Ryan's cabin, Hannah found him on the porch, staring at the train ticket in his hands. "You haven't answered him," she said quietly, sitting beside him. "Your brother." Ryan looked up, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "I'm waiting for another answer first." Hannah took a deep breath. For months, she had clung to her belief that the frontier was no place for vulnerability, that love was a luxury she couldn't afford. But facing the reality of Ryan possibly leaving had shattered that illusion. The true risk wasn't in loving again. It was in letting fear rob her of happiness. "The children adore you," she began softly. Ryan waited, understanding she needed to find her own way to the truth. "I've told myself so many lies," Hannah continued, "that I could do everything alone, that needing help made me weak, that loving again would only lead to more pain." She met his gaze. "But the truth is, I'm stronger with you than without you. We all are." Hope kindled in Ryan's eyes. "Hannah, I love you," she whispered. "I think I have since you fixed that roof and didn't make me feel helpless for needing it fixed." Ryan laughed softly, then grew serious again. "I don't want to replace what you had before. I know your husband will always have a place in your heart, in your children's memories." "You couldn't replace him," Hannah agreed. "But you've created your own place, one I never expected to find again." Ryan gently took her hands in his. "Hannah Wells, will you marry me? Let me be a father to your children, a partner to you. Let me prove that even on the frontier, love isn't just possible, it's necessary." "Yes," Hannah said simply, the single word carrying the weight of all her hopes and fears and newfound courage. 2 weeks later, they were married in the small church in Pine Creek, with Hannah's children standing proudly beside them and the whole community in attendance. Even Sheriff Mills came, bringing news that Walsh was facing prison time for his crimes. After the ceremony, as friends and neighbors celebrated at Hannah's transformed homestead, Ryan pulled her aside for a moment of quiet. "There's something I need to give you," he said, pressing a folded document into her hand. Hannah opened it to find the deed to Ryan's property, now bearing both their names alongside Hannah's existing deed. "I spoke with the land office," Ryan explained. "Our properties adjoin at the creek line. Together, we have one of the most promising spreads in the valley. Enough for a real future. Enough to pass on to the children someday." Tears filled Hannah's eyes as the magnitude of this new beginning washed over her. From widow to wife, from struggling to thriving. All because you stopped to help a stubborn woman who didn't want to admit she needed anyone. Ryan smiled, brushing away a tear from her cheek. "You never needed rescuing, Hannah. You just needed a partner worthy of your strength." Later that evening, as the celebration continued around them, Ryan gathered Emma, Thomas, and little Sarah close. "I want you to know," he said seriously, "that I will always honor the memory of your father. I'm not trying to take his place." Thomas looked up solemnly. "Mama says you're making your own place." Ryan nodded, touched by the boy's understanding. "That's right, and I want you to know something else." He looked at each child in turn, then at Hannah, who stood watching with shining eyes. "From this day forward, you're family now. All of you. And on the frontier, family is everything." As autumn painted the Colorado hills with gold and crimson, the Gentry Wells homestead flourished. The combined properties provided ample grazing for a small but growing herd of cattle. The expanded garden yielded a harvest that filled their root cellar for winter. Most importantly, the house, once silent and half-abandoned, rang with laughter and love. One evening, as the first snow dusted the distant mountains, Hannah and Ryan sat on their porch watching the children play with the new puppy Ryan had brought home. Thomas was teaching it to fetch, Emma was constructing an elaborate bed for it from old blankets, and Sarah was simply giggling with delight every time the puppy licked her face. "I was wrong, you know," Hannah said softly. "About the frontier." Ryan took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "How so?" "I thought it was a place that demanded we harden ourselves against loss, against need." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "But it's actually a place that teaches us how essential connection truly is. No one survives alone. They merely exist." Ryan kissed the top of her head. "That's the paradox of this land. It's harsh enough to break you, yet it's in that very harshness that you discover what truly matters." As the children called for them to join their game, Hannah rose, tugging Ryan to his feet. The false belief that had guided her for so long, that vulnerability was weakness, that independence meant isolation, had been replaced by a deeper truth. That true strength came from the courage to love even knowing loss was possible. That real independence meant choosing connection rather than having it forced upon you. Hannah looked at her family, the children who carried her past within them, and the man who had helped her find her future, and knew with unshakable certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The frontier had not broken her, it had led her home.